How about one more hand for Jason Rivera? You know, it gives me great pleasure today to be allowed to introduce my good personal friend and fellow instructor as today's keynote speaker, Steve Pegram. Steve has been a trusted advisor to FDIC and the Penwell Fire Group of magazines for many, many years. He's always stepped up at the right time, and he's always been there to apply his wisdom and insight to everybody's advantage. Steve's a tremendous family man. He's a stalwart defender of the fire service and a true gentleman. Please allow me to tell you a little bit more about Steve. Steve was appointed as the chief of the Goshen Township Fire Department EMS in 2009. In addition to his duties as chief in Goshen, Steve is both active in national fire service organizations and local organizations. He currently serves as the president of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, and Chief Pegram is also an active member in the International Association of Fire Chiefs Safety and Health section, representing that organization on the NFPA task, reviewing the implementation of safety and training programs for firefighters on hybrid and electric cars. Steve was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. However, he started his career in the fire service in the suburbs of Philadelphia. How did we lose that one? While he was still in high school. Soon after high school, Steve moved to New Jersey, where he attended college and served as a fire inspector for the Princeton, New Jersey Fire Department, as well as a captain in the Pennington, New Jersey Department. In 1997, Steve moved to Mason, Ohio, where he was a deputy chief until October of 2000. From 2000 to 2007, Steve served as the chief of training and shift commander for the Loveland-Symes Fire Department in Loveland, Ohio. And from 2007 to 2009, he served as the deputy fire chief in Azena, Ohio. Chief Pegram has an associate's degree in fire science from Mercer College in Trenton, New Jersey, a bachelor's degree in organizational management from Wilberforce University. In 2012, Chief Pegram became a credentialed fire officer, and in 2014, he completed the Ohio Fire Officer Program. He's a 1998 graduate of the National Fire Academy Staff and Command School, and Chief Pegram also serves on the FDIC Penwell Advisory Boards, and he has published more than 25 articles pertaining to fire services operations, and he teaches locally and nationally on fire EMS topics. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, please give him a strong FDIC welcome to the international keynote speaker for 2016, Steve Pegram.
Hi, Cooper. I heard him. Suddenly, my mother-in-law just shouted out, "Can we please pray?" There I was, sitting with my pastor, my in-laws, and my best friend Ed, and my world was falling apart. What if I told you today, every single one of you could take a step after this keynote to be a hero, to save somebody's life, without ever going on another call, without even leaving your seats? Would you do it? Be a hero? Save somebody's life? My journey to this stage is a lifelong trip. Like most of you this morning, I've been sitting in those chairs for 20 years, looking up at the FDIC stage and listening to some of the best instructors, chiefs, company officers from all across the country. I've always dreamed of being up on this stage, but I never thought it was to bring this message that I'm bringing today. As Bobby said, I was born and raised in New York City. By the age of 2, I was racing up and down my block with a red tricycle and a plastic fire helmet on my head, imitating sounds of a Federal Q siren. By 10, I was subscribing to fire magazines and forcing my parents to take me to parades and musters. My summers were spent in Pennsylvania at my grandparents' house. My mom and dad actually grew up 6 doors down from each other, which allowed me, when I went to visit Grandma, it was a ×2 treat. If you didn't like what one grandmother was having for dinner, you simply walked down the block and checked out the other offering. It was there in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, that I was first exposed to the volunteer fire service. They had a loud Gamewell diaphone horn that would blast when there was a call, and all my neighbors of my grandparents were volunteers and would race out of their house by foot, by bike, by car. And I would jump on my bike and follow them. I would join in the parade. I'd watch the rigs roll out. I was hooked from the minute I saw it. And then I found out you could join the fire department at the age of 16. It was during these summer visits that I first met my friend Ed Klein. Like me, he was just waiting around to turn 16 so he could join the fire department. We became fast friends and are still best friends 30 years later. To my parents' surprise, at the age of 16, I joined the fire department and started spending every night, weekend, holiday, vacation, and all my summers at Grandma's house. I'll never forget the night that I first got my 3/4 length boots, a long coat, and a plastic Philadelphia helmet. It felt like my first run would never come. One night I'm uptown grabbing a slice of pizza, probably about 100 yards from the firehouse, when that fire horn started to blast. Fire! I ran like a maniac, thinking I'd missed the truck even though I was 100 feet away. Jumped on the back step of a 1972 Han and raced off to my first fire, brush, in the meadow under the railroad trestle. I was finally a firefighter. We pulled up, I stretched the red line to extinguish the inferno, which was about 3 feet. Back home in Brooklyn, after some significant disagreements with school administrators, my parents were informed that Stephen's educational opportunities were going to be elsewhere. Probably share that with a few of you. Facing expulsion, my parents began searching for a new school, someplace that I would obviously become more serious about my studies. They ended up doing what a lot of parents do with a kid like me, and they sent me off to New Jersey to boarding school. That would straighten me out. I was there about 15 minutes when I heard the wail of the siren. I knew what that meant. There was a firehouse close by, and within the first 24 hours, I found that fire station and peered through the window at the rigs. It wasn't long before I was volunteering in New Jersey during the week, Pennsylvania on the weekends. My grades actually got better because if I maintained a few B's, the school administrators let me leave class to go to calls. It was awesome. In those days, I would run to the firehouse, and I usually made the first truck, a 1971 American LaFrance. It was an awesome fire truck. My first fire was on a cold winter's night. Snow was coming down, and we arrived to find heavy fire showing from a Cape Cod, single story. As we made the push through the front door, yes, Ray, we did interior attack, I suddenly bumped into something, actually, someone. That fire, my first fire, ended up becoming a double fatal. John and Helen Childs had returned home from a vacation in Florida. They went to bed not knowing that there was a fire burning below them in the basement. Smoke alarms were later found on a shelf still in the box. Now, I've been to quite a few fires over my 28-year career, and I don't remember the names of many victims, but I still remember to this day John and Helen Childs, and obviously for some reason held on to the news clipping. Maybe because it was my first fire, maybe it was because it was my first fatal fire, but what has struck me the most even today is our inability to get a working smoke detector in every home. Fast forward 27 years to Goshen, Ohio in 2015, my fire department suffered another fatal fire. Similar home, similar conditions, and again, no working smoke detectors. As we sit here today talking about change in the fire service, changing in tactics, changing in science, changes in ethics, what about changing the culture of fire prevention? Why can we not get a $10 smoke detector in every home? Last year, my department, Goshen Fire and EMS, through an AFG grant, gave away 500 smoke detectors, and we still had a fatal fire with not a single working smoke detector in that house. It's my opinion that that's where the grant money needs to be spent to get those smoke detectors into the homes. One afternoon, I was hanging out at the firehouse in Pennington, and a man pulled up and walked in with a small little boy with him. As I gave him a tour around the station, I learned he was a fire chief from Virginia back for a high school reunion. Like me, Billy Goldfeder had been sent away by his parents in New York to this small town in New Jersey to go to boarding school. And like me, he had volunteered while he was there too. As we chatted about the people, the trucks, the teachers, many things hadn't changed in the 15 years since he had been there. We became fast friends and have been going to fires together in Ohio for the last 19. After high school was a little bit of college, several part-time jobs, a few promotions. And one day I just got a call from Billy and he said, "What the heck are you doing?" I quickly realized it was time for a new experience. I didn't have any roots in New Jersey, so I just packed up and moved to Ohio. 5 years was my goal. Finish my degree, spend some time working getting some valuable experience in a busy combination fire department under the mentorship of Chief Goldfeder. And then I was going to get back to New Jersey where I belonged. But then I met a girl. One of my firefighters suggested that I meet his sister. Red flag number one. Anyone who is trying to set their sister up on a date, there's got to be an issue, right? When I asked him to tell me something about her, he said, she's nice. Red flag number two. I politely found an excuse for a long time not to meet up with him or her ever again. But after work one afternoon, the same firefighter invited me out to dinner. He said a bunch of guys from the firehouse were going out for wings. Sure, I'd go along. I arrived and found just two people, Marty and his wife, and two empty chairs. As I sat down, I could see that a setup was already in progress, and Marty said, "Go ahead and order. My sister will be here in a few minutes." I realized I'd been had, but I figured I'd sit this one in. Molly arrived, and she too had been set up, not knowing that I was going to be there. Then, as the two of us sat there kind of staring at each other, we ordered our food. Marty and his wife got up and left. Molly and I were officially on our first date. My now brother-in-law, Marty, must have been pretty smart, but please don't tell him I said that. Because within 6 months we were engaged, and a year later we got married. Ed from Pennsylvania was my best man. Billy, who I'd met years before at the firehouse, was in the wedding, and his son, the 12-year-old or the 2-year-old boy that was with him at the firehouse, was also in my wedding party. Molly and I quickly fell into the routine that so many people fall into. We bought a house, had a couple of jobs, had a son, Jackson, and then a few years later, a daughter, Riley. One of my fellow firefighters lived right down the street. Steve Otterson, or as he goes by, everybody calls him Steve-O, showed up the day we moved into our brand new house. He unloaded the truck, he set up blinds, he moved furniture. I was exhausted and remember wanting to go to sleep, but Steve-O was still working, and after all, it was my house, so I figured I had to stick it out. Steve and his wife, Deborah, became very close friends. Steve and I would work on a lot of projects together, building fences, hanging pictures, finishing basements. We prided ourselves on being creative and using the wrong tool to get the right job done. We worked harder, not smarter, but we had a whole lot of fun in the process. And we drove our wives absolutely nuts. 12 years of marriage flew by. A few new jobs, a few new houses. And then one day, Molly started to cough. Just a bit at first. And then a lot more. During the next few months, I noticed cough increased, and Molly seemed out of breath doing basic tasks. My wife, the former high school and college athlete, was winded walking up the stairs to put her kids to bed. What was going on? Molly was still working at the time, but we could all see something was wrong. I was sitting at work one day when my phone rang, and I picked it up. And she said, "Hi, I'm in the emergency room," in a very calm but strange voice. As I drove to the emergency room, I remember thinking I knew something like this was going to happen. I got to the hospital, and the doctors were there. Molly was in severe respiratory distress, but she would be okay. Surely it was just allergies or something like that. quick CAT scan showed a huge pulmonary embolism lodged between her heart and her lungs. She was immediately rushed to the ICU, and they aggressively worked to save her life. Family and friends rushed to our side, and in a few days she was stable. Once stable, it was time to look for some answers. Why did she get so sick so fast? Where did this embolism come from? More tests, more procedures, very few answers. After a few months, we finally got a diagnosis: pulmonary fibrosis. The cure? Medically, there really isn't all but one. We were referred to a specialist at the University of Cincinnati. He was blunt and honest. The disease would kill Molly within a few years if not treated. And the only treatment was a double lung transplant. Here's another important piece of advice. If someone you love becomes sick, and I mean really sick, do not Google it. The information that you glean from that search is not going to make you feel more comfortable with the situation. My wife Molly had gone from a very healthy and active 37-year-old female to one that was very sick virtually overnight. To suppress the disease and progression in her lungs, Molly had to come to grips and give Molly time to come to grips with the reality facing our family. They started a host of medications and treatments. Molly endured months of low-dose chemotherapy and high dosage of steroids while going on to oxygen 24 hours a day. At first, just 2 liters, then 4, then 8, 10, 20, all the way up to 25 liters. As Molly's body struggled for more and more oxygen, other vital organs started to fail. Her kidneys, her liver, and even her heart became in jeopardy. As luck would have it, my good friend and mentor, Chief Goldfeder, used to be a volunteer firefighter on Long Island. And one of the guys he rode tailboard with in Long Island was a guy by the name of Johnny Orns. Unlike many of the firefighters at Manhasset Lakeville who went on to a trade, became a police officer or a firefighter, Johnny became a thoracic surgeon at Johns Hopkins. His specialty? Lung transplant. Throughout my life, people have appeared at different times at just the right moment. Many of them firefighters. Here was just another great example of the network and brotherhood of the fire service. Dr. Johnny Orns immediately reviewed Molly's case. He knew our doctors in Cincinnati personally and agreed with their treatment and diagnosis plan. All of this was very reassuring, but also very humbling. Molly and I had been holding out for that silver bullet, a different option, something else that we could do to make her healthy again. Dr. Orns quickly came to the same conclusion. Double lung transplant was the only chance at survival, and soon, not later, while Molly was still had strength. Dr. Orns volunteered to take Molly as a patient at Johns Hopkins, which was 9 hours away from our home outside of Cincinnati. Or we could go to the Cleveland Clinic, which is about 4 hours away. In March 2014, we finally took the trip to the Cleveland Clinic, one of the top lung transplant centers in the country. Now, I've been to a lot of doctors with Molly and a lot of hospitals, but nothing compares to the Cleveland Clinic. To describe it in one word would be absolutely, that's 2 words now, amazing. Molly underwent several days of testing in Cleveland to see if she could even be a candidate for lung transplant. The doctor said she was approved. Her test results would determine her lung allocation score, or LAS. Your LAS dictates where you rank on the national list of organ registry. The higher number that you get on your LAS, the sooner you'll get transplanted, or at least that's the theory. Molly was approved, and she received her first LAS score of 45. We really didn't know if that was good or bad. You want a higher number, so you're higher on the transplant list. But, as our awesome Dr. Maria Budev said, the higher numbers also mean you're very sick, probably hospitalized, and people in there with LASs of 40 often do get transplanted. There was one more problem. Molly is short. Not that short. I never thought of my wife as being short, but in the transplant world, 5'2" is very short. Most donors, we were told, are males, usually in their mid-20s, and often die of a traumatic event. Most of these are taller, larger stature, and their lungs, if transplanted, have to fit into the frame of the 5'2" person. Finding a match would be a little bit harder, we were told. And then we started to wait. Like parents expecting a child, transplant patients are told to be ready to go at any time. For us, we needed to be at the hospital within 4 hours, and we lived 3.5 hours away on a good day. We would be cutting it close. Basically, you pack a bag, line up people to watch your kids, feed the dog, watch the house, and once you're transplanted, you have to live in Cleveland for 2 or 3 months post-transplant. We got ourselves ready, and we started to wait. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and Molly was getting sicker. We still had time, though. A few more days went by, a few more weeks. It was time to go to the clinic again and get checked out. They did more tests. Molly's scores went down, but her LAS went up. It was at this time the doctor started asking us about Molly's quality of life at home. Did she need to be hospitalized? Now, Molly's a very strong person, but she's also extremely stubborn. And though she'd been okay for a few months, we were starting to get concerned. But this progressed throughout the whole summer. We canceled our summer vacation. We took out a loan and built a pool in the backyard so we could try to act like a normal family. Molly had a 100-foot oxygen cord that would reach out of the house, out to the pool, where she could sit on the edge and watch the kids play. Most important to Molly at this time was trying to be a normal mother. By early fall, both Molly and I were starting to lose hope. She was getting much sicker. Everything was getting harder. At our September checkup, it was decided that if Molly wasn't transplanted in the next 2 weeks, that she would have to be hospitalized so they could better manage her health, specifically her breathing. For all the paramedics in the room, on high-flow oxygen, Molly's resting SpO2 was in the low 80s. It's truly amazing what the body will do to compensate for the lack of oxygen. No transplant came, and in October, Molly was admitted to the lung transplant floor of the Cleveland Clinic. It was an extremely emotional time for us. I was taking her to Cleveland, but this time I was going to leave her there until we got a transplant or that other thing we just didn't talk about. Our friends and our family were awesome. They watched the kids, cooked meals, cut the grass, cleaned the house, and took turns in Cleveland, so Molly was almost never alone. Her LAS score went up significantly because she was now hospitalized, and the hospital was able to better manage her breathing with more high-tech, high-flow oxygen equipment in excess of 24 liters. Even with her higher LAS, we continued to wait. I'd spend a few days in Cleveland with Molly and then head home, sometimes making the trip back and forth 3-4 times a week. I'd go home for a budget meeting, back up to Cleveland. Go home to watch a kids' basketball game, then back up to Cleveland. I'm pretty confident the Ohio State Police started to wave at me as I drove by. Never got pulled over, though. Kids are amazing, specifically mine. Jack and Riley maintained honor roll grades while living out of a suitcase with a different aunt, a different uncle, a different grandparent, or a different friend, picking them up, dropping them off, and watching them on a daily basis. Not that we didn't already have a little bit of stress in our life, but then there was also a concern about money. Transplants and all the associated expenses are extremely expensive. Hotels, meals, travel post-transplant, stays in Cleveland, and a lot of the medication you take are not covered by insurance post-transplant. We were warned that some of the anti-rejection medication Molly would need post-transplant would cost thousands of dollars a month post-transplant after the insurance companies paid their part. Now, asking your friends, your family for money is awkward, hard, and really never gets easier. But it also will amaze you how people will come together with an outpouring of support and generosity. Back home, my good friend Steve-O took over the role with his wife of coordinating activities. They started a website, a nonprofit paperwork, and put together all kinds of fundraising activities for our family. They just did it. They weren't asked to do it. Many firefighters' friends coordinated fundraisers for Molly's medical bills. Friends from church would slip me a check on the way out on Sunday morning, and random cash and gas cards would end up in my mailbox at work. FDIC students and instructors gave too. In fact, Bob Atlas, who I met at FDIC in 2014, was the first person to donate to Molly's website. Just another great example of the brotherhood we celebrate here at FDIC every year. By November, doctors were obviously less enthusiastic about our situation. Molly was deteriorating quickly, and no lungs were coming in. Molly's doctors started to talk to us about a procedure called ECMO. ECMO is basically lung bypass. When the lungs are no longer functioning, the doctors insert a large two-way tube into the heart. The blood that usually goes from the heart to the lungs is then circulated out of the body into a machine which oxygenates the blood and then pumps it back into the body to all the vital organs. The procedure was told to us as being serious but relatively straightforward, other than the garden-sized hose that they wanted to jam into my wife's jugular. ECMO requires the patient to be moved to the ICU until transplant, sedated at first so that they don't wiggle around too much and dislodge the tube that has now replaced their lungs. There's no turning back from ECMO. ECMO was scary, not something Molly wanted to do. She knew this was a last-ditch effort towards an end-of-life scenario. As an RN, she knew that many people that go on ECMO never come off. On one of my weekend trips to Cleveland, Molly was not doing well at all. She looked tired. She'd been a super trooper for months, years actually, doing whatever the doctors told her to do, but now her body was just shutting down. She was tired, her lungs were shot, and her body was failing. For the first time in the 3-year journey, she even talked a little bit about dying. I was supposed to be in Iowa that weekend for the Iowa Fire Instructors Conference, but Chief Billy Goldfeder filled in for me. Saturday afternoon, as I sat in the Cleveland clinic with Molly, my phone rang and it was a FaceTime call from Billy. There, he showed me a room full of instructors all waving and saying hello. They passed the booth that day and raised $3,000 for Molly's medical expenses. Again, the true brotherhood of the fire service that we all learn and thrive on here at FDIC. I decided not to go home that weekend. Something told me I needed to stay for a few more days, and my gut feeling was right. On Monday, when the doctors came around to do their morning rotation, they told us that Molly was going to go to the ICU. It was time to put her on ECMO. They could see that her body was shutting down. We made the decision to proceed. A surgeon had to be scheduled, and calls to the family had to be made. I immediately sent out a message on Molly's blog, Facebook, and Twitter, asking friends and family to pray for Molly, pray for the doctors in this new imminent crisis we were facing. For the first time, I really felt like the end was near. I started thinking about being a single parent. Who watched the kids when I went to a fire at 2 a.m.? Molly did. Who picks the kids up from school when I'm at work? Molly. Who cleans the house, does the laundry, puts up with my crazy hours, silly hobbies, and even crazier friends? Molly. The outpouring of support from our friends and family at this time was nothing less than amazing. On that morning, Monday, November 10th, 2014, around 2 p.m., we met with Dr. Tong, a thoracic surgeon who would do the ECMO procedure. Dr. Tong sat on Molly's bed with her, explaining the procedure and going through the consent forms. I think I felt worse than I do right now. Nerves. Suddenly, Molly's phone rang. Instinctively, she just took the phone and handed it to me. I looked down at it, and it was a Cleveland number, but unknown to us. I picked up the phone, and all I heard was a female voice. "Tell Molly we have lungs." What? Did I hear that correctly? Yes. We have a match for Molly. We're going to move her to pre-op for transplant. Now imagine for a second every emotion you have ever felt in your life. Joy, fear, pain, happiness, love, disappointment, the birth of a child, the death of a parent. Now shove that all in a bottle, shake it up, and then open the lid and let it explode. That's how I felt at that moment. Tears of fear were replaced by tears of joy. A donor had been found and Molly was going to be transplanted. Phone calls had to be made, updates to social media, purely out of convenience to let the masses know not only had prayers been answered, but more prayers were now needed more than ever. They packed up Molly and moved her to the ICU to await transplant. Molly's mom and dad jumped in a car and headed to Cleveland. Her twin sister, who really wanted to be there, had our kids, so she said she would wait and come up after the surgery. My best friend since I was 12 years old, Ed Klein, immediately left work outside of Philadelphia, drove to the airport, and demanded a ticket to Cleveland. A few hours later, as I was sitting in the ICU with Molly, I turned around and my buddy Steve-O was standing beside me. He just came. We spent many hours sitting in the ICU, waiting for lungs to arrive. Molly's nerves and anxiety went through the roof, as was mine. Unlike the transplant floor, where everybody has a large private room, in the ICU, you see all the other patients, many of them on ECMO, many of them on vents, all pre- and post-transplant patients, and all very sick. Even though we knew transplant was on the way, Molly's body continued to rapidly deteriorate. By the time they were ready to take her back for surgery, she was in severe respiratory distress. I kissed her on the forehead, and they wheeled her away. I walked out into the waiting room of about 50 seats, and there just sat my mother and father-in-law, Nick and Judy, our pastor, Justin, and my best friend, Ed. I sat down, and it was 1 a.m., November 11th, 2014, Veterans Day. We sat there and started the long wait for surgery that we were told would take about 10 hours. We'd only been sitting there for a few minutes, and no one really had much to say, when suddenly, out of nowhere, Molly's mom gave out that scream, "Please, can we pray?" I remember thinking how random her outburst was, but at the same time, praying for Molly, praying for the doctors, praying for the donor and their loved ones seemed appropriate. So about 5 minutes into Molly's surgery, we joined hands and prayed together out loud. Fast forward 10 hours. Dr. Tong came out of surgery. He looked exhausted. He walked over to us and told us, the surgery went well, but we did have one complication early on. As Molly was wheeled into the emergency or the operating room, her body finally failed. Minutes before transplant, she stopped breathing and her heart stopped. The entire surgical team that was assembled for a transplant immediately started to work to resuscitate her, but they could not get her heart to start. Molly was under CPR for almost 20 minutes when Dr. Tong decided the lungs were there, Molly was there, and rather than throw the lungs in the garbage and declare Molly dead on arrival, they would proceed with the surgery anyway. They quickly cracked her chest, put her on heart-lung bypass, and started the surgery with no idea whether or not she would recover or ever wake up. As Dr. Tong told us about the first few minutes of surgery, I realized that it was at that same moment when Molly's mom randomly yelled out her call for prayer. Did she sense it? Feel something? I don't know, but it's awfully more than a coincidence. I'm so thankful that Molly's doctors took the risk and proceeded with the surgery rather than let her die that morning. Prior to surgery, Molly had told me just to talk to her post-transplant. When I got to her bedside, she was on a ventilator, had multiple IVs and chest tubes. I leaned in and started telling her about the surgery, leaving out the CPR part. The lungs look perfect, I told her. The surgery went great. You look beautiful. At that moment, tears started rolling out of her eyes, even though that she was unconscious. Molly's life was saved because someone, somewhere, unknown to us, made a decision to be an organ donor. Without her transplant that day, there is no doubt in anyone's mind that Molly would have died on November 11, 2014, rather than start her new life. That person, Molly's donor, and their family are our heroes. At that horrible moment of their loved one's death, they made a decision to save a life through organ donation. Molly's life was saved by that selfless act, and we are forever grateful to them. So now I ask you, wouldn't you like to save a life? Our little journey would not have been possible without our faith. A higher power obviously worked to save Molly's life, and there was no luck about it. The importance of family has never been shown to me more stronger than through this whole experience. Cherish your family. Hug them. Tell them that you love them, even that annoying brother-in-law. Yes, he's here. I am blessed to have a lot of really close friends, but 3 key figures who came in my life at different times helped make this journey a success. Ed, who I met riding bicycles in 1982, has been the epitome of a best friend, someone who would drop anything and everything to be by your side, and when I needed a friend the most, he did just that. Billy, who long before the secret list or firefighter close calls was an awesome friend and mentor. When Molly got sick, he used every resource he had, every friend, every contact to make sure Molly's care was the best care that she could get. Thank you to Billy and Dr. Orns. Finally, Steve-O. He's quiet, appears to be moody, has only one feeling, but he always is there. To help from the front, to help from the back, he doesn't care. He gives more than he takes and mostly goes unnoticed, and that's an example of a good friend. All the firefighters I worked with in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, you have been amazing. Friends and donors and supporters. The ISFSI Board of Directors, Executive Director Lee Hubbard. I simply can't describe the support and the love that you showed Molly, Jack, Riley, and I. I am humbled to be your president and committed to pay it forward as a servant leader to each of you. The Penwell Fire Engineering family, Bobby, Ginger, Diane, all who called, emailed, prayed, and supported Molly and I throughout every move we made, allowed me to share this story today. Please don't underestimate the power of prayer, your faith, your friendships, the brotherhood of the fire service, and the support you can garner from them. Tell them that you love them. Make a point to call them. Don't send a text. Don't send an email. Please give more than you take. You never know when a cough might be a little bit more than a cough, or see you later might be goodbye. Someday you might have to cash it all in. You might need it all back tenfold, and I can tell you and confirm today, if you are there for them, they will be there for you. We have all taken an oath to save a life, even if it means losing our own. If you were to lose your life today, wouldn't you want to continue to honor that oath? You can, right now. Register to be an organ donor. You can register right now at www.donatelife.net. Thank you. Thank you. I think Billy wants to take a picture.